pleasure to welcome you to this commemoration of the Development Center's 60th anniversary. I'm Melinda Crane. I am political analyst at Deutsche Welle, and it is a great pleasure to accompany you as moderator. As many of you probably know, the Development Center traces its roots back to a vision that was evoked by John F. Kennedy in 1961 as he was ratifying the OECD Convention. He said at that time, and I'm quoting, "United, there is little we cannot do in a host of cooperative ventures. Divided, there is little that we can do." Today, those cooperative ventures certainly look more important than ever as a cascade of complex, interlocking crises widens divisions, both amongst and also within countries, reversing decades of convergence between advanced economies and developing ones. The Development Center's mandate as a forum for those two groups of states to work together on an equal footing uniquely positions it to help solve the pressing problems that have been sparked by all the different crises that we face, from the pandemic and the Russian war against Ukraine to the climate crisis. Hence, today's event is dedicated not simply to recognizing the center's activities over the past 6 decades, but also most especially to looking forward, to asking how the center can contribute to shaping a future that is, as the title of this event states, strong, shared, and green. And before I hand over to the center's director to say a few opening words, just a very quick look at what is in store this morning. Following her remarks, a short presentation by the Development Center's head of multidimensional country reviews will set the scene for a high-level panel on development we can do together. Following a short break, our final session this morning will focus on the future of the Development Center with presentation of a report by 3 representatives of the center's group of eminent personalities. Exchange and debate are a vivid dimension of the Development Center's approach and of its work, and that's why we also look forward very much to hearing from you, ladies and gentlemen. I will tell you a little bit later on how you can pose questions to our panelists. And now, let's get started. It is a great pleasure to hand over to the director of the OECD Development Centre, Ragnheiður Elín Anadóttir, who formerly served as Iceland's Minister of Industry and Commerce and a member of the Icelandic Parliament. Welcome, Raga.
Thank you very much, Melinda, and welcome. A very warm welcome to all of you here. And yes, I have to say, sorry, guys, that you're standing. I'm glad, though, it's mostly the staff of the Development Center. We'll make it up to you somehow. But honorable ministers, distinguished guests, ambassadors, colleagues, past and present, I'm very happy to see past colleagues who charted the way of the Development Center before I was honored to be here only a little over a year ago. And I want to thank all of you for your contributions over the years. Ladies and gentlemen, I am immensely honored and happy to be here on this very special day of events, the celebration of the OECD's 60th anniversary. Big birthdays, they are always wonderful opportunities. We can look back, where are we coming from, and we can learn from the past, and we can look at what we have achieved and what makes us special. But more importantly, we need to look forward. We need to look forward at what we need to achieve in the years ahead. As I said, I've had the honor of directing the Development Center for a little over a year. And every day, I feel concerned about the great challenges that we face in promoting sustainable development today, and I'm sure that you feel the same. But every day I'm also filled with great hope. I learn about amazing work being done all across the world. I meet inspiring people every day, inspiring people who are making a difference, and many of you are here today. I meet policymakers who are improving well-being for their citizens. I meet researchers that are sharing their insights. I meet activists who are ensuring that promises are kept. I meet business leaders that are putting sustainability first. I meet philanthropists that are coming up with innovative ideas. And all of us here are pointing the way forward. The world today can feel overwhelming. We're in a crisis mode. It seems like we are in a constant crisis mode these days. But I do take confidence from the past. And in this regard, I would like to invite you to watch a short video that was prepared by the capable, qualified, fabulous staff of the Development Center. And I'm looking at 𝐓𝐿𝐼, who is standing here, not to receive a standing ovation, but he is the mastermind behind this video. No pressure. Can we put the video on, please?
Fighting the pandemic, managing debt, securing food and energy. For today's policymakers, promoting development sounds a lot like crisis management. But turning 60 can help you see the big picture, beyond the latest crisis. Where have we come from, and where can we go? This year, the OECD Development Centre turns 60.
The Development Centre was created soon after the OECD itself.
I propose further that the OECD establish a development center.
In the midst of the Cold War, and in time when many new nations were born, the Centre's founders recognized a crucial need. The OECD and its member countries needed a safe space to understand and build trust with other countries.
The Centre became an honest broker in times of momentous political and economic change. In the 1970s, when developing countries called for a greater say on the global economy, the Centre convened dialogue on critical issues like oil prices and international banking. In later decades, when many countries faced financial difficulties, the Centre organized discussions about structural adjustment and the liberalization of financial markets. In the 2000s, its work on shifting wealth helped understand the rise in economic power of non-OECD countries like China. It also began collaborating with regional organizations to help address the specific needs of countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean.
To support its dialogue, the Centre became a development pathfinder, sharing its policy expertise on how to help make development happen. In its early days, it worked on how countries could promote growth, trade, and industry. In the 1970s, it called on policymakers to pay closer attention to issues like agriculture, migration, gender equality, and social protection. Today, the Centre helps policymakers pursue development in all its dimensions, guiding them in designing strategies that reconcile economic, social, and environmental objectives.
In 60 years, we have seen crises come and go. Today, we must deal with the pandemic, with Russia's war on Ukraine, and with the climate crisis. Yet, we know that these crises can be overcome. We can share policy lessons and success stories. We can gather the best data and analysis. And we can collaborate across geographical and income divides. The OECD Development Centre and its 53 member countries are ready. Strong, shared, green. This is development we can do together.
Again, thank you, Felix, Irit, all colleagues who made this video a reality. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining me on this little trip down memory lane. Looking back teaches us a few things. First, we learn that whenever it feels like we're drifting too far apart, there are events that help us come back together. As people who believe strongly in international collaboration and dialogue, let's be on the lookout for these events. Let's seize opportunities to come together wherever we can. Secondly, history tells us that while crises come and go, we can still make phenomenal progress over time. The late, great Hans Rosling never stopped reminding us, using hard facts and evidence, how much life has improved over centuries and how much life has improved over decades. As people who care about sustainable development, let's play the long game. Never lose sight of our goals and our aspirations. Coming together and confirming new goals. This is just what our 53 members did yesterday at the high-level meeting, the 8th high-level meeting of the Development Centre. We discussed the need for development to become stronger. We shared ideas on the structural reforms that countries need to become more resilient. But we also called for a stronger international system to help countries manage debt and meet their financial needs. We discussed the need for development to become more shared. Here, we focused on how to address the root causes of gender inequality. How can we change gender norms? We also discussed the need for development to become greener. We heard it out loud, we heard it clear. Global progress will only come through dialogue, more mutual understanding and respect. We need promises to be kept. We need to help different countries contribute in different ways. Besides addressing these policy challenges, I'm delighted to say that our members also approved a policy statement on future perspectives. They have shared with us a vision for the future, highlighting policy challenges and priorities for the Development Centre. And it's on our website. Please check it out and do take the time to read it. It's good stuff. Now, today, let's build on the outcomes of the discussions yesterday. This meeting is open to the public, full house, and it's streamed live on our website. And why are we doing this? We're opening up to everyone because the Development Centre needs you. It wasn't mentioned in the video, but one of the center's very first activities back in the 1960s was to bring together 250 researchers, research institutes, all working on international cooperation, including on South-South cooperation. Ever since, one of our main roles has been to provide opportunities for our members to exchange with the world's leading development experts. President John F. Kennedy wanted exactly this kind of dialogue when he called for our creation 60 years ago. He knew that we need to learn from the best and hear new ideas if we want to conduct good work on development. So here is how we will put his advice to work today. As Melinda said, we will hear first from Mr. Jan Rielander, who is a senior counselor at the OECD Development Centre and the lead author of the key issues paper that we published for this week's events. And that's also on our website. Jan will share our thoughts on how we can do strong shared development, green development together. And following Jan's presentation, Melinda will guide us through a conversation with distinguished speakers who will share different perspectives and deep insights on where we stand on sustainable development and what we need to do. And finally, we will take a look at the future and hear the advice of the group of eminent personalities who will present the report. We want to hear from you. There will be opportunities for exchange and dialogue, and Melinda will give you those instructions and guidance, but not much more for me to do here except to start listening and learning and hearing from you. Thank you for being with us, and let's have a wonderful day here together.
Thank you so much, Raga, for those very strong messages. And I'm very glad that you emphasized dialogue several times, because one of the interventions that struck me yesterday was when the very erudite high-level representative from Greece reminded us of the original origin of the term dialogue, namely an interchange of different logics, a sharing of understanding. And I think that's exactly what we want to do now in our first panel. I'm going to ask our panelists to please come up to the stage one by one, because it is a bit cozy up here. So as I read off your names, please join me on stage, and you see your name tags here on the seats. So it is a pleasure to welcome Mauritius Minister of Finance, Economic Planning and Development, Dr. the Honorable Rangandan Padayachi, who has also served as First Deputy Governor of Mauritius Central Bank. Please, sir, join me. And I'm very pleased to greet the Director of the National Planning Department of Colombia, Jorge Iván González. He is formerly Dean of the Faculty of Economic Sciences at Colombia's National University, and also head of its Research Center for Development. Wonderful to have you with us, and you may take your seat there. We are also joined by the Director of Philanthropy of the WHO Foundation, 𝐓𝐮𝐞𝐬𝐝. She has had a career in partnership development, including roles with the United Nations Foundation and with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. 𝐓𝐮𝐞𝐬𝐝, thank you so much for being with us. And I think that we do not have our fourth. Yes, he is coming. Wonderful. It is a great pleasure to welcome once again, because he also spoke with us yesterday, Imam Cissé. He is rector of the Côte d'Ivoire's Grande Mosquée, Salam Plateau, and he's an outspoken advocate for gender inclusion, as well as a tireless opponent of one of the most extreme forms of violence against women, namely the practice of female genital mutilation. Imam Cissé, I believe that he's just now being picked up by Boshra, perhaps, so he will join us in just a moment. And finally, I would like to welcome our input speaker, economist Jan Rielander. He's head of the multidimensional country review at the OECD Development Centre, and he previously led the Africa Desk's work on growth, transformation, and employment. So Jan, if you would, please join us on stage.
Thank you. Melinda. So I will give a quick input, if you could maybe already put up my presentation. And while Raga said that I will give you an idea of how we think that we can do shared, strong, green development we can do together, how we can do it together, what I'm actually planning to do is I will ask all of you what you think, how we can do it together. And just to get you prepared, this will be one of the very few presentations where I'm explicitly asking you to take out your cell phones at some point, and your cell phone will need some connectivity. So if you could just check, if you don't have your network, there is the Wi-Fi OECD hotspot. It's very easy to log on. Make sure you have some connectivity, because it'll be with your phone that you'll be able to participate. So where to start? And we've seen a great video. Our job at the OECD is a lot about evidence-based. So I thought I'll just tell the story with some evidence. So let's celebrate some of the big successes we've seen in development in the last 60 years of the Development Center. And there's life expectancy, which has grown from 53 years to 73 years for many, many more billion people today than at the time. So this is a huge achievement for us and for really the global human community. Then we have, of course, GDP per capita, which went from not much, $459 to 12,263 globally. It increased 22-fold for 7 billion people today, as opposed to 3 billion people at the time. So many more people have many more means to feed their material needs and have a better life. Foreign direct investment developed. There's a lot more global activity into development, but you can already see on foreign direct investment that there was a much more going on over the last years, and that also we've seen some struggles, but nevertheless, it's up 123 times from what it was in 1970 when the data started. And then we have exports, 147 times what they were in the 1960s. But also here you can already see a bit the plateau as of 2010. There was still some growth, but not all that much anymore. And we remember what Professor 𝐎𝐿𝐵 told us yesterday about we're probably looking at a big change in what types of models of development are still available and how much we can still bet on global trade as a driver. And then, of course, extreme poverty has dropped a lot from 44% to 8%. It's come up a little bit with COVID. I'll get to that. But nevertheless, this, I think, is a huge success and really cause for celebration. And last, my big favorite, the amount of people that are literate. And today we have 5 billion people that are literate, as opposed to 1.75 when we started, which means 3.3 billion more people that can read OECD reports. So I think this is a huge achievement we should all be very proud of. And if we keep going at that rate, I think there is no risk that we'll ever be out of a job writing reports. So how did this look like in terms of the global development and the chances really for this type of shared development we can do together? What I'll show you now are just some maps that basically show you convergence in terms of GDP. So what you see here is all the countries in green, and a light green, darker green is better, have growth of GDP that is faster than the average growth of GDP in OECD countries. So, which means as long as a lot of this map is green, there's convergence and there is development in terms of countries that are less economically developed grow faster and are catching up. So this is kind of what we want to see from the development perspective. And the 1970s, where 1974 was a good time. And then, as we've heard before, then there were very challenging times. Then came the 1980s. We had a number of debt crises. This is, for example, how this looked like in 1987. And then came better times. We had 1990. We had big changes in the global order. We also then had what we've described as shifting wealth, where really with the opening up of many countries to the global market, there was a huge progress. China was a huge driver of globalization of demand, and many countries managed to really catch up quite fast. And we had the financial crisis in between, but still in 2017 things looked pretty good. So we've had some 20 fairly good years, and now though we are coming to a very challenging time, as we have really spoken about many times. We've seen schooling has been missed a lot during the pandemic. 70 more million people have been pushed into extreme poverty, and we all still very much feel the challenges of the pandemic and dealing with it. We also now know about Russia's war in Ukraine. That's had a deep impact on fertilizer prices. You see here food prices for corn are really going up very fast. There's multiple reasons, but the war really is the one reason that's pushing this very strongly today. Food security is becoming a huge challenge, and we've been looking into this at the Development Center, what we can do. And it's really important that we come together as a global community to address this and prevent suffering. We also have inflation. These are just numbers for the US, but you can take any market really, and this is what it's looking like. Inflation is skyrocketing, and as a consequence, to try to deal with it, central banks are raising interest rates very fast, as you can see here at the end of both of these graphs. The result of this, for example, for the United States, is that the dollar is surging. That means for all developing countries that have debt in dollars, this debt is becoming very expensive. Interest rates are coming up. So we have a lot of challenges in terms of of dealing with debt and challenges of inflation. And we've had some very good discussions already yesterday where Rebecca Greenspan made a very forceful argument for, is this really the way to go? But it's also clear that nobody really has a good answer, but it's a very good topic for discussion. And then, of course, we have climate change. And what you can see here on the one hand is the number of natural disasters as they are by decade. And then also on the other side, you see the damages by type of disasters measured in US dollars. So you can just see how this is becoming more and more challenging. Climate change is here. We are still working on trying to make it not quite as bad, but it is very much a reality that we have to deal with and that we have to do something about. So we've had good times, we've had challenging times. Now we had good times again, now we have very challenging times. Now, how do we do strong shared green development together? And this is, so how should we do it? When policymakers, and we have a discussion with policymakers here, need to figure out what is important, what is urgent, and how we're going to do it. And this is really where you will now come in. So I hope you've all set up your Wi-Fi access and I hope your cell phones work. And what I will do with you is we're using this website, menti.com. I will first ask you to take a perspective. Do you want to follow from the perspective of the country, from a country, or from a global perspective? And then what I will ask you at the end, I will go now through some suggestions of what are some priorities that we've put out in the key issues paper that we think are important to look at. And then I will ask all of you, what do you think is important and what do you think is urgent? And this is something I will ask you in the end. So you'll need to be very attentive and follow the presentation because you'll be asked to answer a question at the end. And to answer that question right now, I would like you to think for yourself, would you like to answer this question from the perspective of a policymaker of a country, or from the perspective from a global perspective, from a multilateral perspective, because those are very much the two perspectives that we deal with at the Development Center and that I think are the key perspectives to think of in development. So to do this, I hope you've all been able to take out your phone. You have full license now to please take out your phones. You open your browser and you go to www.menti.com. It's a very, very simple interface, and it will simply ask you a code. And you see the code here. It's 65571455. And then there should be a question for you, and you can pick country or global perspective. And please just do that. And 𝐓𝐿, I would then ask you to just switch us over quick to the Menti interface to just get an idea of what are the perspectives that people are choosing for this exercise. Yeah, the code is up there. It's 65571455. You see it all the way on top of the screen. And so we're having an interesting race here between the country and the global perspective. I think this is very nice. We have a diverse set, a lot of participants. We also have people that are following us on Zoom. And I hope you're also participating. So please don't be surprised if these numbers go beyond the seating capacity of the auditorium. We actually have many more that are currently with us. But I think this gives us a very, very nice impression. And I will ask you to keep this perspective that you've now chosen, keep that in mind a bit as we go through the rest of the presentation. Because from this perspective, I'll ask you this question at the end. What is urgent and what is important? And that's then what we will ask our panelists to figure out for us, how to solve the urgent and how to solve the important. So I'll go back to the PowerPoint, please. So putting development back on track. Our first key topic, our first big session at the high-level meeting yesterday. One key issue we have to deal with is debt and complexity. I told you about inflation rates going up, about interest rates going up in the big reserve currencies, dollar exchange rate is going up. And you can see here very clearly that global debt to developing countries has increased significantly between 2008 and 2020 for all countries and for lower income and lower middle income countries. So the debt burden today is much higher. And clearly, as interest rates mount, a higher debt burden will cause much more pressure. And we know that countries, more and more countries are at danger of being in trouble. At the same time, when you look at the colors inside the bars, you see also that today there's massively more private debt that's part of this public debt of developing countries than there was in the past. And there's more multilateral debt. And the key here is that there's many, many more creditors that are behind this debt. So dealing with this debt has become much more complex because we have many more actors that need to be involved whenever you whenever you want to sort out a country that's in debt trouble. And we know that a lot has happened. The G20 had the Great Debt Suspension Initiative for the pandemic, but that ran out. Afterwards, a common framework has been agreed, but this common framework is only relevant for lower income countries. It doesn't apply to middle income countries. And I think what would be really an achievement for the global community would be to once and for all agree on some way of dealing with a sovereign bankruptcy. We all know that bankruptcy is one of the key institutions of a market economy, but we cannot get our act together to deal with this internationally. And every time you have a debt crisis for the country, it's a very long process and it's very tedious. So this is a pitch I would make as something we really need to do for putting development back on track. We also should be doing better with development finance. We know, and these are great numbers from our colleagues from the Development Cooperation Directorate, that the financing, the investment gap for the Sustainable Development Goals amounts to $3.9 trillion annually. And what you see here is the amount of development finance that's available. It's around $4 trillion. You see also the big chunk in blue, that's taxes and government revenue of developing countries. And it's only the red and the second red, the blue and the second red at the bottom, that is ODA and other official flows. The red's is remittances and capital flows. So you can see that the development finance question is huge. And it very much involves how countries themselves can mobilize the necessary finance. And you see, therefore, next to it, we've put tax revenues as a share of GDP. And you can see how, starting back in the 90s, these numbers show that there's been some progress. And especially you can see that Latin America here has been doing quite well. But we also see that overall, there hasn't really been enough advancement in terms of the ability of countries to mobilize the type of financing we need. And at the same time, the amount that's available globally is also very, very limited. So this is an open question, and this is something where we really need to figure out how to come together. The big long-term challenge, of course, is jobs. How do we bring all the young people that will enter the labor market into employment? And you see this here for Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And what you see is just the amounts of young people that will enter. So you see this is especially rising for Africa. And then you see that the internal parts of the bars are about who is being educated to what level. And you see more and more people are being educated. So there's more opportunity here. But you also see that there's more, especially in Africa. So the dynamic of creating jobs and the dynamic of really bringing the economies forward must be in sync with this type of growth of the youth population. And maybe most importantly, we need resilience. We've learned from the pandemic, and I think Professor 𝐎𝐿𝐴 made a great comment yesterday that the one thing we've learned in the pandemic is that we can do a lot and deal with a lot when we really have to, and we really have to get our act together. We've learned that we need things like automatic stabilizers in terms of social protection systems. We need to have systems of knowing who needs support and then be able to give that support directly, as opposed to being confronted with a situation where suddenly many people need support and we don't even know who they are and we don't know how to reach them. And I think this is an experience that many have made. And we've learned that we need strong communities and we need strong societies where everybody's willing to pitch in for each other, to help each other out, and to really come together in the face of a challenge. And we've learned that these are things we need to nurture and we need to instill proactively. So resilience as something we really need to build. Now, getting the green transition right, the second big topic, the second topic in the 𝐎𝐿𝐴's paper, our second session yesterday. And this is really a matter of survival, and it is not that easy. This just shows you the types of CO2 emission reductions that we need to achieve to stay in line with moderate increases in temperature. 2020 is in yellow, 2030 is where we, in blue is where we should be by 2030. You can see that the amounts of effort that need to be done to reduce CO2 are immense. We're already in 2022. I'm not sure that we're on the trajectory to reach this. So we really need to find a way how to reduce our global emissions to be able to continue life on this planet in the long run. But at the same time, development is very much about expanding access to energy. And I will show you quickly slides for Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And what you see here is simply down in blue, the level of electricity per capita that's available in Africa versus the line on top, the level of electricity per capita available in a high-income country. And you see the trajectories. The yellow trajectory here would be on if all of Africa were to follow the global growth, average growth in electricity, it would reach this type of high income electricity level sometime around the year 2200. So clearly the expectation by people and for policymakers is to do this much faster than getting there by 2200. But also Africa's current energy mix is 75% not renewable and 25% renewable. So you can see this huge challenge. How do we do this? How do we do increasing access to energy together with doing it green? And the challenge is huge. And the other two lines, the green and the red, are just if Africa was able to expand energy at the pace of Vietnam in red or at the pace of Bangladesh in green. This also is some of the type of learning we can do at the Development Center. How do you learn from others? What are the key strategies to put in place? This is how this looks for Asia. Still a very long way to go, which means a lot of expansion of energy capacity. And then for Latin America, the level itself is much higher already at 600, but it is still quite a way to go also here to reach the types of energy, electricity access levels. So this just to point out that yes, we need to reduce CO2 emissions, but at the same time, there's a huge demand to increase, and this is just for electricity, the access to electricity. And this is even just today, before everybody is driving an electrical vehicle. So how do we put these two things together? That I think is a key challenge. And how can we figure out the financing? Renewable energy is a lot about capital costs at the beginning. Operating costs then are very low. But as you can see, and as we all know, the costs of financing, the costs of capital in developing countries are very high. They are much higher than in high-income countries. So just the cost of capital massively increases the cost of an investment into renewable energy. So how do we solve this? And finally, realizing the opportunities for all, the imperative of gender equality. The costs of gender equality are very high, and I will quickly go over this. And then I think we'll also have this discussion here. The high costs of gender equality come in many, many ways. We see here, for example, very interestingly, when we look at this from really the macro perspective, that discriminatory social institutions hamper economic development, and that if you want as a country to reach high levels of development, there is no way to do it together with discriminatory social institutions, and this is measured by our SIGI scores. I think this is a very, very important message, that this really links very closely with development. And also it's about what are some of the drivers that make this happen. It's really about women, girls are a very, very important part of our society, 50% of the population. If you don't allow 50% of your population to develop their fullest potential, you're holding back 50% of your opportunity of development, and you're really doing wrong by 50% of the population. And what we see here very importantly is, this is data from Côte d'Ivoire. We see when, for example, the decision-making on what type of education girls are allowed to receive is with the father, girls receive much less education. When there's joint decision-making in the household, then girls receive much better education. So it really goes down to the family level, the household level, the institutions that happen, not only formal institutions, but the institutions, the culture, the norms that happen in the family. And this is where it really all comes together, how social institutions matter for development and gender equality. And I think when we think about strong shared green development we can do together, it's really about addressing all of these institutions, thinking about reproductive rights, women's rights to inherit. We see that in many countries, there are challenges around inheritance rights, attitudes towards women political leaders, violence against women. We've heard a lot about female genital mutilation as a horrible practice, and Imam Cissé, I'm sure will speak about his efforts to really do something about this. And these are key things that we all need to work on together, both men and women, to take us forward and to really make development happen together. With that, I will want to come back to you, because the real question I want to ask you now is, so what do you think? We go back to Menti. It's the same code, 6557-1455. And the question, and maybe if you can already put up the slide on Menti, the question I'm asking you this time there is a little bit more challenging than the last question. It's really now about what do you think is important and what do you think is urgent? We have 8 options. You can skip one if you don't want to answer all of them. You can skip, but try to please, from your perspective, having heard the presentation, having been with us, and knowing a whole lot about development. We have managing developing country debt, mobilizing development finance, reducing global CO2 emissions, access to electricity for everyone, government effectiveness, gender removing norms and laws that discriminate against women, food security, and innovation. And I think we see here that the very top, in terms of most important and most urgent, is about reducing global CO2 emissions. We are having food security. Actually, we see a little bit of a race going on. So now food security just made top, actually. Food security, we'll give it a little bit of time, but you see that there is a bit of a race. So everything seems to be very important and very urgent. We had a bit of a laggard there. Even government effectiveness is making it up there. So this is very good. Okay, innovation is getting pushed down from urgency. So I think this is about the picture we have. So food security, reducing global CO2 emissions, gender is right up there. And then kind of a next level is access to electricity for everyone, government effectiveness, and managing developing country debt is about there with access to electricity for everybody. And then mobilizing finance and innovation a bit lower. Everything is important, but CO2 emissions are more important than access to electricity, and gender norms are right up there as a key issue we need to address. Thank you very much. And I hope you can sort this out for us.
So just as we talked about the cascade of complex interlocking crises, we see also a cascade of complex interlocking goals all being prioritized there in that pool. Thank you so much, Jan Rielander, for those important messages. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be very interested in hearing a few audience questions. So let me just remind you that we will take them later on in the last 15 minutes of this session, and also in the session that follows that. And we do have microphones in the room, or you can use our Zoom chat box for this function. And a very quick timekeeping hint to all, if I may, because we do have quite a compact window for our session. So I'm going to ask you, dear panelists, to please keep your remarks under 3 minutes. The closer you can get to 2, the more rounds of discussion we can do, and also the more time we have for our interaction with the audience. So let me pick up now on the strong shared green part of our title, and essentially on that goal mix that we just saw there. And I'll begin, if I may, with Minister Dr. Pagliacci. You are the co-chair of the Development Centre's 8th high-level meeting, which was held yesterday, as Raga told us. And unsurprisingly, discussions there also focused on this cluster of crises, on the setbacks to poverty alleviation and to the convergence between advanced and emerging economies. What did you take away in regard to how the international community can put development back on track and address these varied goals that fall under that strong shared green rubric? What is there still left to try that we haven't already tried when it comes to reducing vulnerability and inequality?
I'm going to speak in French. So, merci, Melinda, merci, bonjour à tous, merci pour cette question. Le développement, on peut se poser, je ne vais pas être très long, je vais respecter les 3 minutes. On vient de poser 2-3 questions. Première question que je répondrai par rapport, est-ce que ça doit être par pays ou passer au niveau multilatéral? Je dirais bien les deux en même temps et forcer sur les deux. Pourquoi? Parce que si vous allez sur un concept pays, c'est très bien, vous allez résoudre les problèmes pour votre pays, mais au niveau international, si vous avez de la pauvreté partout, vous aurez le même problème par la suite. Si vous allez au niveau international avoir des discours et ne pas conscientiser les pays sur les problèmes et avoir des programmes par pays, à ce moment-là, on aura des projets, des intentions, mais peut-être pas une réalité sur les différents pays. Je regardais concernant les différentes priorités. Pour moi, la priorité suprême reste l'accès à l'éducation. Je vais le dire pourquoi l'accès à l'éducation, et je viens dessus, parce que c'est l'éducation qui va vous permettre par la suite d'avoir un développement équilibré et inclusif. Vous avez regardé, quand je dis l'accès, c'est l'accès gratuit, pas un accès payant. Donc, dans beaucoup de pays, quand vous faites des études, vous voyez que l'accès a permis par la suite des réductions concernant d'autres problèmes sociaux, d'autres discriminations. Nous, par exemple, à Maurice, je le dis bien, on était un pays très pauvre, cité par un prix Nobel d'économie comme un pays voué à l'échec. Et pourtant, 6 ans après l'indépendance du pays, donc de 68 à 74, arrivé 75, le premier ministre de Maurice décide de rendre l'accès à l'éducation gratuit. Cela change tout à Maurice. Pourquoi? Avant cela, les parents faisaient un choix entre envoyer le garçon ou la fille à l'école. Et à partir de ce moment, j'ai fait ma thèse dessus et je l'ai vu, la date, l'année change tout. Et vous commencez à avoir de plus en plus de filles qui ont accès à l'éducation secondaire. Et à partir de 81-82, nous avons beaucoup plus de femmes sur le marché du travail qui peuvent accéder aux emplois et par la suite contribuer au développement économique de Maurice. Donc, c'est un processus peut-être long, mais on voit les résultats immédiatement par la suite. Donc, l'accès à l'éducation. Deuxième, pour moi, l'accès à la santé, très, très importante aussi, un accès libre encore. Je prends le même raisonnement que pour moi, un des plus grands au niveau concernant l'économie du développement en matière saine, l'accès libre aussi au niveau de la santé, parce que la santé va permettre par la suite un développement plus productif. Donc, les deux sont combinés. Par la suite, tout le reste découle. Si vous avez un peuple, je le regardais bien, hier on avait le co-chair, l'Islande. Elle disait qu'elle n'a pas nécessairement, dans son pays, il n'y a pas nécessairement les mêmes problèmes qu'on trouve dans les autres pays. Quand vous allez regarder, in fine, qu'est-ce qui se passe dans ces autres pays, vous allez voir que peut-être c'est un problème pas culturel, mais d'accès à l'information, d'accès à l'éducation. Quand vous voyez les problèmes par rapport aux femmes en général, l'accès à l'éducation. Donc, pour moi, ça, c'est une priorité. Donc, si vous me dites qu'est-ce qu'on doit faire, remettre l'accès à l'éducation sur l'agenda. Parce que pour beaucoup de pays, c'est quelque chose de fait. Ce n'est pas fait. Donc voilà, je termine là-dessus et c'est l'accès à l'éducation.
Low-hanging fruit. So we will return to that shortly. Let me ask Dr. Gonzalez, if I may, about the triangulation of these different goals that we saw in Jan Rielander's presentation. And with reference to Colombia, your nationally determined contribution under the Paris Treaty, your climate targets, are amongst the very most ambitious in Latin America. So certainly that's the green piece. But at the same time, like many emerging economies, you face a pressing need to provide better access to energy for your growing population, to create jobs, especially for the young. So that, in essence, is the social piece. How is Colombia striking a balance between those goals? Is there a necessity in a time like this for painful trade-offs?
Bonjour, je suis très content d'être ici. Je vous remercie beaucoup. Nous avons en Colombie 3 objectifs. Et je vais essayer de montrer qu'ils sont une relation et que c'est possible d'avancer dans les 3 directions. Le premier, c'est l'émaillement du territoire, que pour nous, c'est très important. Ce qu'on va faire avec une portion du territoire très grande qui n'a pas de contrôle de l'État. L'État a beaucoup de problèmes. Nous continuons avec une violence très forte. Nous calculons qu'il y a 20 000 personnes en armes. Et le premier point qui est très important, c'est le narcotrafic. Et quand on parle d'appui international, qu'est-ce qu'on va faire pour la légalisation de la cocaïne? C'est un sujet très important pour nous. C'est très urgent d'avoir une discussion à propos de ça. Le deuxième aspect qui est très important pour nous, c'est la transformation énergétique, qui nous avons les mêmes problèmes que tous les pays. Comme est-ce qu'on va faire cette transformation d'une manière progressive? Qu'est-ce qu'on va faire d'abord? Comment est-ce qu'on va réduire notre dépendance du pétrole? Et comment est-ce qu'on va faire ça de manière progressive? Et le troisième point, c'est un peu une relation avec l'éducation, la santé, c'est l'inclusion. Comment est-ce qu'on va faire pour avoir une société plus égalitaire? Et pour ça, j'ai dit hier, nous avons la nécessité d'un nouveau ordre financier international. Qu'est-ce qu'on va faire avec la Banque centrale? Les taux d'intérêt sont très élevés. Le coût de la transformation énergétique est très compliqué. Comment est-ce qu'on va faire à niveau international pour réduire les taux? Quand nous avons créé la Banque centrale dans les années 70, c'était une situation internationale tout à fait différente. Pour moi, la Banque centrale aujourd'hui, surtout dans notre pays, n'a pas d'instrument. La seule manière de combattre l'inflation, c'est avec la récession. Et ça a des conséquences pour toute l'activité économique, ça a des conséquences sociales et politiques très fortes. Et je ne sais pas pourquoi la discussion internationale sur les ordres financiers n'est pas plus urgente. Et pour moi, c'est un peu une première approximation. C'est possible de trouver des conciliations de différentes politiques, mais s'il y a un accord international, s'il y a des appuis internationaux, parce que c'est très compliqué pour un pays seul d'avoir ces résultats. Et pour ça, je crois la fiscalité internationale, le financement de tous les aspects qui ont relation avec le changement climatique. C'est impossible pour un pays seul de arriver à tout ça. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. And we will pick up on several of those points. Thank you very much. Let me go now to Mrs. 𝐓𝐿. And environmental and climate protection have in fact become a central focus for many international organizations and institutions, with around $400 million a year now dedicated to supporting developing countries in this area. The question is it enough? Is it really enough to make a real difference in helping developing countries embark on this very, very difficult trajectory toward their green goals in the current economic climate?
So is it enough? I will answer the question saying what the power of philanthropy really is. So $400 million might not seem a lot against trillions of dollars in an economy or whatnot. But first of all, this is powered by generosity by individuals, by foundations, by organizations. Philanthropy never fill that larger funding gap of funding any given organization or around addressing climate change. It has a huge role in being a catalyst for change. It can invest in areas where governments and private sector can't or won't. Those big moonshot ideas. They've also had an incredible role to play in powering movements. The anti-apartheid movement, the civil rights movement in the US, and indeed getting climate change on the platform of policy areas has also, it's played a catalytic role in making sure that we are actually doing this change. So I applaud those who have a lot of this generosity, and I applaud the OECD for starting Net Forward, who's also celebrating an anniversary this year, a 10th year anniversary of recognizing the power of philanthropy, working with government, working with private sector to really foster that kind of big change we're all seeking. So while $400 million might not seem like a lot, I wouldn't underestimate the power of it. I also would say, OECD Net Forward has a report that says, around $11 billion a year overall goes towards development from philanthropy. Over half of that is for health and reproductive rights. And that is a huge investment. And again, used in a catalytic way, working with governments, it has immense power. The WHO Foundation was also started to harness the power of the private sector and philanthropy to be working with governments and others to say that philanthropy has a unique role to play in catalyzing change. And by investing smart and by working with governments, we can really foster that change, because without working on, can't talk about climate change without talking about the health of our planet, which is also about the health of our individuals and our communities. And so investing in health and bringing that, $5 billion a year to really come to bear will have immense power. The WHO itself is working on creating and has prescriptions for recovering in a healthy green manner. Number one, protect and preserve the source of human health, which is nature. Invest in essential services from water and sanitation to clean energy and healthcare facilities. Promote healthy, sustainable food systems. Build healthy, livable cities. And ensure a quick, healthy energy transition. And stop using taxpayer monies to fund pollution, which is polluting not just the planet, but ourselves and our bodies. It's estimated that in the next 30 years, an additional quarter to 500,000 people per year will die because of climate change related issues. Malnutrition because of drought crises, vector-borne diseases, mosquito-borne diseases are now, dengue used to affect 300,000 people a year. Now it's estimated that over 1 million, because mosquitoes are changing to different latitudes and to different altitudes. So again, going back to your original question, while $400 million may not seem like enough, used in the right way, and using that power of philanthropy being a catalyst for change, investing in moonshot ideas, empowering movements, and collaborating with governments, and collaborating with private sector, it has immense power.
Thank you very much. And I want to pick up on the point that you made about inclusion and sexual and reproductive rights, and link it also to what we heard from Minister Parayachi in regard to inclusion and access to education, and come now to Imam Cissé, because one of the compelling arguments, Imam Cissé, that you have made for countering the practice of female genital mutilation is that it marginalizes women, and it essentially excludes many of them from public life. And we've heard again and again yesterday and today that inclusion needs to be a central goal for countries that wish to promote development and resilience. So let me ask you this. A traditionalist might say to you, well, the fact is this is a traditional practice and the traditional place of women is in the home. What would you reply as to why gender inclusion is important for development?
Merci. Je pense que cette question elle est très importante et pertinente. Et le premier point sur la réponse qu'on doit donner à ces traditionalistes, il faut que les traditionalistes eux-mêmes soient suffisamment éduqués. Éduqués intellectuellement, moralement et dans tous les sens pour comprendre que l'éducation nous amène à comprendre la profondeur et le danger que les femmes subissent par les mutilations génitales féminines. Ça crée un handicap qui amène la femme à s'occuper plus de sa santé que de penser au développement dont elle doit être actrice et non accompagner les hommes ou bien rester à la maison. Ça aussi, ça peut être un métier de rester à la maison pour s'occuper. Mais là encore, il faut outiller la femme en lui donnant suffisamment d'éducation intellectuelle pour se libérer de ces fardeaux des perceptions traditionnelles. La femme n'a pas que le rôle de rester à la maison. Pas du tout. Je n'y crois pas. Et je me bats contre le fait que la femme soit illettrée, sous-éduquée, et que les femmes, les hommes, on sait, toutes les guerres que nous connaissons, depuis les premières guerres, deuxième guerre, les guerres partout, ce n'est pas le fait des femmes. Et si les femmes étaient suffisamment formées, éduquées, elles pourraient et elles peuvent, elles ont la capacité de bloquer des processus de guerre partout dans le monde. Et je prends le cas de l'Afrique. Quand il y a une guerre, les premières personnes qui souffrent profondément, ce sont les femmes. D'abord elles-mêmes, et deuxièmement leurs enfants, et ensuite l'éducation en général est bloquée. C'est le cas des pays où il y a les coups d'État actuellement. Au moment où on doit s'occuper du vrai développement à partir d'un processus démocratique et d'un processus également de bonne gouvernance, les gens pensent à leur sécurité. Et celles qui en souffrent beaucoup plus, dans leur chair et dans leur conscience, ce sont les mamans. Donc, je voudrais répondre ici pour dire que je réponds toujours à ces traditionalistes qu'il ne faut pas regarder la femme avec des yeux de mort. C'est-à-dire comment les vieux prenaient, les générations passées traitaient les femmes, aujourd'hui et encore aujourd'hui et demain, la femme mérite l'éducation, elle mérite la santé, elles ont besoin de santé, mais elles ont plus également besoin de renforcement de situations de façon à être autonomes économiquement. La précédente, celle qui a parlé tout à l'heure, a parlé des problèmes, disons, de philanthropie. Le cas de la femme ne doit pas être, elle ne doit pas être seulement un objet de philanthropie, mais elles doivent être des actrices, mais il faut leur donner les moyens, l'éducation, la santé, et troisièmement, elles doivent être renforcées de telle sorte qu'elles soient des partenaires au développement et en plus des leaders politiques. Parce que nous pensons que la femme a plus de cœur, en tout cas en ce qui concerne celles que je connais en Afrique et ailleurs. Elles souffrent pour leurs enfants, elles souffrent pour l'humanité et elles ont besoin d'être éduquées et d'avoir les ressources nécessaires. Je voudrais terminer pour dire que la Côte d'Ivoire a une avance sur beaucoup de pays de la sous-région. Parce que nous avons le ministère de l'Éducation nationale qui est confié aux femmes, le ministère de la Famille, des Enfants et des Affaires sociales est confié aux femmes et elles gèrent les questions de mutilation génitale féminine. Notre fondation appuie le programme national de lutte contre les mutilations génitales féminines. Et c'est ainsi également qu'il y a ce qu'on appelle le CIF, Comité interafricain de lutte contre toutes les pratiques traditionnelles néfastes, donc y compris les mutilations génitales féminines, les mariages précoces et les mariages forcés, ce que les traditions religieuses ne recommandent pas. Ça aussi, ce côté, il faut le mettre, il faut en parler. Ce n'est pas la religion qui dit qu'il faut que la femme soit au bas de l'échelle et que l'homme soit au-dessus. Non, la femme a besoin de liberté, elle a besoin de traitement égal avec l'homme, de façon à ce que notre monde connaisse beaucoup plus d'humanisme et d'humanité. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. Let me suggest that in a very short second round of discussion, because unfortunately time is growing short, but I do want to come to audience questions, but in a very short second round, we talk about partnership and what we can do together, the second part of our title of this session. And I'll just pick out a couple of issues that were raised both in the poll that we did earlier from Jan Rielanda and in the remarks that you have made. So starting with debt, Minister Pariachi, and in fact, we heard Director Gonzalez say we need a new international financial system. We're hearing a lot of talk about another lost decade for developing countries and emerging economies. What do we need to do? What can we do together in the international financial system differently to ensure that we don't have another lost decade?
En parlant de la dette, je vais aller très vite dessus. Nous voulons continuer avec un système, je le dis bien, un peu du passé. J'ai été à la Banque centrale, je viens d'écouter mon ami qui vient de parler de la Banque centrale, je suis actuellement aux finances. Nous devons pouvoir avoir, encore une fois, accès aux mêmes droits, qu'on soit un pays avancé ou un pays émergent. Et vous voyez très bien que souvent, les institutions internationales pensent que certains pays ont le droit à certaines choses et d'autres pays n'ont pas nécessairement les mêmes droits. Par exemple, pendant la pandémie, nous, à Maurice, nous avons utilisé des mesures qu'on appelle hétérodoxes, peut-être non conventionnelles, mais c'était important parce qu'il fallait préserver la population et l'homme. Je le dis, nous, on a subi vraiment sérieusement cette crise. On a dû fermer le secteur touristique pendant plus d'un an, 18 mois de fermeture, mais il fallait soutenir ces personnes. Donc, ça nous a coûté, ça a augmenté la dette. Et par la suite, bon, ce qui est un peu, on peut comprendre, vous avez certaines agences de notation qui commencent à dire, bon, la dette a augmenté, etc. Pourquoi? Parce que dans leur façon de faire les estimations, ils prennent l'année 2020 en moyenne pour regarder le taux de croissance moyen. Mais nous savons très bien que l'année 2020 n'est pas une référence. Ça a été un moment dans notre histoire économique qui pèse très lourd, mais ça a été un choc non prévu. Aucun pays n'a voulu avoir cette crise. Donc, quelque part, utiliser cette année, utiliser les données de cette année dans une grille de calcul pour estimer si on doit abaisser la note d'un pays, je pense là personnellement que ça peut jouer en défaveur. Pourquoi je le dis? Tous les pays en Afrique sont considérés comme des sub-investment grade. Donc, les hedge funds, les institutions financières ne peuvent pas aller investir dans ces pays, ne peuvent pas financer ces pays. Donc, quelque part par la suite, vous aurez toujours le même problème de financement de certains pays africains. Et c'est là-dessus, j'ai fait cette demande auprès du FMI, j'ai parlé de cela quand j'avais assisté à des forums au niveau de l'Union européenne. Nous devons vraiment mobiliser les énergies là-dessus pour qu'on se rende compte, si vous dégradez une note et que vous ne donnez pas accès à un pays, accès à la finance, vous ne pouvez pas par la suite espérer qu'il va s'améliorer, que ses conditions économiques vont s'améliorer. Il faut vraiment trouver un moyen pour aider ces pays. Et le problème qu'on a eu, encore une fois, c'est l'année 2020 avec la pandémie qui a affecté certains pays plus que d'autres. Donc, en tenant compte dans certaines estimations les indices de l'année 2020, ben ça perd un peu, ça empêche les pays africains d'avoir cet accès facile à certains financements.
Director Gonzalez, I would ask you to respond to the same point. Essentially, we just heard from the minister, extraordinary times require extraordinary measures. We are seeing capital now becoming increasingly expensive. What do developing countries need to do differently in the face of the current situation, and how can development partners help them?
Je crois que nous devons d'abord poser la question parce que dans la discussion internationale, ce sujet, ce n'est pas tout à fait évident. Et je crois que le premier point, c'est poser la discussion, dire c'est un problème, et après qu'on accepte que c'est un problème, nous pouvons tous trouver une solution. Et pour moi, c'est important, le dernier rapport de la Banque des paiements internationaux, ça montre très bien quel doit être le rôle de la Banque centrale, quel doit être le rôle de financement international pour la lutte contre le changement climatique. Et c'est une vision tout à fait différente de ce que nous faisons maintenant. Et je crois que le premier point, c'est dire réellement c'est un problème. Parce que l'orthodoxie de la Banque centrale chez nous, dans tous les pays d'Amérique latine, ne permet pas d'avancer dans les directions que nous considérons que doit être. Et c'est impossible d'avoir une productivité agricole, d'avoir une compétitivité internationale avec des taux d'intérêt très, très élevés. Et je crois qu'on doit chercher entre tous une solution pour ça. La dette internationale de tous les pays a une croissance qui jamais était pensée dans les années 70. C'est impossible de gérer une dette qui est 60, 70, 100% du produit. C'est impossible. C'est un monde complètement différent de ce que nous avons vécu 30 ans avant. Et pour nous, quand les banques de la Réserve fédérale augmentent les taux, c'est un problème pour tous les pays. Et qu'est-ce qu'on va faire avec ça? Je ne sais pas, mais vous dites, entre tous, on doit chercher chemin alternatif. Je ne sais pas quelle est la réponse, mais on doit poser le problème et on doit voir qu'est-ce qu'on va faire. Notre dette en Colombie, 60% du produit. Qu'est-ce qu'on va faire avec ça?
Thank you very much for underlining the challenge that we face. Let me go to 𝐓𝐿 and ask you to talk about a term that we hear so often, and we all pay a lot of tribute to it, the just transition. But let's think about it in a slightly different way, namely multilaterally and internationally. Because as we know, and essentially as was just implied by Director Gonzalez, developing countries are facing not only mountains of debt, but they're also facing increasing expenses for adaptation to a climate crisis that they did more or less nothing or very little to cause. Against that background, do we need a change in mindset on the part of rich countries about how they invest capital? Should they be thinking about shifting out of mitigation in their own economies to do a much more for developing countries that are absolutely at the front lines of the climate crisis?
I mean, my expertise is in philanthropy, so I will speak primarily from that lens. But yeah, I think it's going to take a radical way of rethinking capital. And so a lot of philanthropy networks and philanthropic organizations are now looking at across the spectrum of how they're looking at investing in development in their own backyards, and how they can have impact. They're not looking at just take the Ford Foundation, not looking at just how to do grants, but they're looking at how can they use their entire endowment and put it to work in the capital markets globally. At the WHO Foundation, we are looking at, how can there be different investment principles when you invest in small and medium enterprise businesses. We recently launched a global health equity fund, which really looks at, investing in small and medium enterprise businesses that have an impact on health and to some degree climate. So different agricultural products, nutrition products. And as part of that, they sign an access pledge. And so they're incentivized because they need the capital to really look at how they will reach low and middle income populations and how do they actually have an open access to some of their IP. So that we're fundamentally looking at how we can shift the incentive models of the capitalist society that we are currently in. And then we're building a global advisory board of health experts to say we will help you and help your business plan reach these different markets, and it will actually strengthen your business. So I think we also have to look at incentive structures across the capitalist systems. I think we have to look at what are motivations. But certainly it's going to take different transformative radical thinking to the point of others on this panel to be doing things differently.
Thank you very much. And one last quick question to 𝐓𝐿 before we come to audience questions. I see they're flowing in. Dear 𝐓𝐿, this very hard work that you're doing to try to change social norms, particularly in regard to excision, but not only there. Who are the key partners for you in that effort, and how can development partners be supportive? The Development Centre of the OECD itself is working on a social institutions and gender index, 𝐓𝐿𝐼, that attempts to track norms and the way they work to support structures that hinder development. But beyond that kind of an effort, what is crucial for you as a partnership?
En fait, en termes de partenariat, au niveau d'abord des politiques nationales, il est important de faire un changement de mentalité. Et c'est sur ces mentalités vis-à-vis de la gente féminine que nous travaillons. Savoir que la femme a la capacité de comprendre, d'apprendre et de donner. Et deuxièmement, il est important d'insister, d'apporter de l'aide aux organisations non gouvernementales de développement, en fait, qui s'intéressent aux questions liées au renforcement des capacités des femmes. Il est important dans notre politique au niveau de la Fondation 𝐎𝐿, nous réunissons les chefs traditionnels qui constituent les postes de résistance contre le changement positif pour leur dire et leur expliquer avec des films et des diapositives à l'appui, voilà la condition de la femme, elle ne mérite pas ça. Et voilà, si on les forme et on leur apporte un système d'appui, voilà ce qu'elles deviennent. Et le compendium des femmes, le compendium des compétences féminines en Côte d'Ivoire est devenu un instrument extrêmement important pour le changement et pour surtout le renforcement des capacités des femmes. Parce qu'en fait, elles sont aujourd'hui plus de 30 000 femmes intellectuelles qui deviennent des symboles. Si vous envoyez vos enfants à l'école, de filles à l'école, voilà ce qu'elles vont devenir. Des médecins, des professeurs d'université dans différents domaines, des ingénieurs. Elles vont vous apporter un mieux-être et peut-être mieux que les hommes. Et voici. Ça, c'est un modèle extrêmement important en Côte d'Ivoire. La deuxième chose, c'est d'avoir mis en place un fonds d'appui, n'est-ce pas, pour l'autonomisation financière des femmes. Et ça fonctionne merveilleusement et qui est appuyé par la première dame de la Côte d'Ivoire, Mme Dominique Ouattara, qui a mis en place un fonds pour le renforcement des capacités des femmes à se prendre en charge et à développer des petites et moyennes entreprises. Il y a en cela également la question des jeunes. Les jeunes sont aujourd'hui intellectuels. Ils sont éduqués, ils sont formés. Ils aspirent à avoir, n'est-ce pas, un job, un travail décent. Mais je reviens à la question de la sécurité. Tant qu'il n'y a pas, n'est-ce pas, ce qu'on appelle une bonne gouvernance, les jeunes restent sur leur faim et quelquefois ils deviennent violents. Et dans cet ordre de sécurité, qu'est-ce que l'OCDE peut faire auprès de nos États pour éviter les soubresauts de coups d'État, des renversements des élus par, n'est-ce pas, par voie démocratique? Ce sont des éléments qui font reculer nos États, n'est-ce pas, de 5 ans à 10 ans, parce que tous les acquis sont mis à plat et ceux qui viennent n'ont pas suffisamment, ne sont pas outillés avec une vision claire de l'avenir, n'est-ce pas, prospère de nos pays. Et donc, je crois que ce sont ces quelques éléments qu'il faut mettre en place pour que nos sociétés soient beaucoup plus équilibrées que ce qu'elles sont aujourd'hui. C'est un véritable handicap de la société tant que la femme ne s'élève pas au même niveau que l'homme. Et c'est ça ma conviction et mon combat.
Thank you very much, Imam Cissé. Let me now go to audience questions. I have one that's come in on Zoom that I will pose to Minister Parayachi. And in the meantime, if you have a question, please put your hands up. And we have a microphone in the room that will be brought to you. So, dear Minister, second question, China is a clear development success. This comes from Martina Garcia. What lessons can we learn that are relevant for democracies?
Je vais être assez large dessus. Le développement qui a suivi avec le processus intense de production au niveau de la Chine fait que par la suite, il y a eu, avec des taux de croissance très, très élevés, ils ont pu baisser drastiquement le nombre de pauvres. Et si on fait une comparaison, vous allez voir que la baisse de la pauvreté au niveau global résulte de la baisse de la pauvreté en Chine en priorité. Par rapport, si vous faites une comparaison, par rapport au continent, dans beaucoup de continents, dans beaucoup de pays, cela a continué d'augmenter le nombre de pauvres absolus. Pour revenir là-dessus, qu'est-ce qu'on peut apprendre? C'est le travail, bien sûr, c'est la productivité, mais c'est aussi l'accès au marché. La Chine, c'est un pays avec une population de plus d'1 milliard d'habitants. Donc, la production est beaucoup plus facile. Et il y a eu aussi un processus à un certain moment de beaucoup de pays avancés qui ont décidé d'aller investir par choix économique parce que c'était moins cher. Donc, pour eux, c'était plus facile d'aller produire là-bas pour augmenter la profitabilité de ces entreprises. Aujourd'hui, est-ce qu'on est dans le même cas de figure pour de nombreux pays? Je ne vais pas dire que c'est difficile à dire, mais pour moi, on n'est plus dans la même situation. Nous sortons d'une crise avec la pandémie qui a réellement freiné la globalisation. On doit être franc dessus parce que on a vu un peu les limites de la globalisation avec la pandémie, avec une rupture de l'offre et aussi un retour vers un certain égoïsme. Les pays qui se battent sur les pistes d'atterrissage pour récupérer des produits pharmaceutiques, on l'a tous vu, on l'a tous vécu. Par la suite, nous avons la guerre en Ukraine, l'invasion de l'Ukraine. Là aussi, nous avons une offre, qui a des interruptions dans l'offre. Le problème actuellement, pour moi, en tant qu'économiste, c'est que ce que je vois, c'est que après des années d'augmentation de l'offre, on a arrêté cette hausse brutalement avec la politique internationale, avec certains pays qui ont fermé, qui ont arrêté d'exporter, qui ont décidé de garder la production pour leur pays. Je parle de l'huile, de l'essence. Il y en a énormément, du gaz, etc. Et même des produits, des foodstuffs, comme on dit. Et maintenant, qu'est-ce qu'on veut faire? Je vais aller très vite. Qu'est-ce qu'on veut faire? C'est on veut comprimer la demande. Et pour revenir et pour aller dans le sens de mon ami, on veut comprimer la demande en augmentant les taux d'intérêt. On se dit, ça va casser l'inflation. Je ne crois pas. Ça ne va pas casser l'inflation. Ça va rendre beaucoup de gens pauvres, plus pauvres encore, et ça va entraîner une hausse massive de la pauvreté à l'échelle mondiale. Pour revenir là-dessus, je pense que l'accès à la finance, l'accès que les investisseurs s'intéressent et qu'on leur donne cet intérêt pour aller dans les pays et pour développer ces pays, qu'on ait d'autres institutions, et là je reviens dessus, d'autres institutions de notation pour pousser ces investisseurs internationaux pour aller investir dans des pays en voie de développement, des pays émergents.
Merci. J'ai une question là.
Bonjour, mon nom est Pierre Duquesne. J'ai été président du Centre de développement. Je remercie pour l'invitation. Je vais poser une question absolument caricaturale, vu le temps. On nous dit défi nouveau. Tout ce que j'entends me rappelle furieusement des années 70-80. Sécurité alimentaire, endettement, inflation, hausse des taux, stagflation, rupture possible du multilatéralisme. Je vais juste rappeler dans cette enceinte que mon pays a refusé d'entrer à l'Agence internationale de l'énergie, à la création de celle-ci, parce qu'elle était vue comme quelque chose du Nord contre le Sud, etc. Donc tout ça me rappelle furieusement mon enfance et ma jeunesse, et je ne vois pas ce que ça a de nouveau. C'est une question provocatrice.
Bon, I will also take another question, then we will get a few answers. I have a question here as well.
My name is Johannes Jütting. I'm a former staff member of the Development Centre. I'm very excited also to be here, and I want to congratulate my colleagues for putting this fantastic panel together and also for drawing the picture. And just following up on the question we just heard, I think it was very interesting to see this perspective from a global level, to see what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, but then also to hear very concretely from countries, from Colombia, from Mauritius, and from Cote d'Ivoire, what can be done. Now, I work for an organization that is called Paris 21. We support statistical capacity development in poor countries. And our assumption, and the assumption behind of what we have been seeing, is that data, statistics leads to good evidence, leads to good policies, leads to good decisions. So far, so good. What do we do in polarized societies? We see more and more polarized societies where people question the difference between a fact and fiction. How do you relate in Colombia, where I had an opportunity to be on vacation, to see what you presented to us in terms of building trust between the different regions, between the different people, and Côte d'Ivoire the same. So the question for me, how can we build trust and social cohesion? So if we collect all this good evidence, that we can really implement it and people buy in, and not half of the population says this is just fiction.
Thank you very much. So let me first go to Director Gonzalez, if I may, to perhaps also address the first question we heard about.
Je ne sais pas quelle question. Non, d'abord une question ici qui pour moi c'est très intéressante. Quel est le pays qui a les plus grandes dépenses en public education? Je dis les pays avec les moins. C'est la Colombie, les plus petites dépenses en éducation, c'est la Colombie. Pour moi, les statistiques de la OCDE ont l'avantage, de montrer la pire situation de public, de dépenses publiques sociales. Quand on fait la comparaison avec les autres pays de la OCDE, la Colombie est dans la pire situation. Pour nous, c'est très bien ça, parce que ça nous permet de dire dans la discussion publique, nous sommes dans une situation, une très, très, très mauvaise situation. C'est pour répondre à l'inverse, la troisième question. Et je ne sais pas si c'est la même situation des années 60. C'est plus dramatique. J'ai dit c'est plus dramatique. Et quand on commençait à parler dans les années 70 à propos des changements climatiques, ce n'est pas aussi urgent. Et maintenant, la situation c'est plus critique. Le thème de la dette, ce n'est pas aussi élevé. Je crois que peut-être sont les mêmes problèmes, mais plus dramatiques, mais je ne sais pas ce que je peux répondre. En relation, oui, en Colombie, la différence entre les régions sont très, très, très fortes. Et les statistiques que nous avons sont plus pour la moyenne, mais les différences régionales sont très, très fortes. Et quand on a la comparaison internationale de la moyenne des pays, la situation, ce n'est pas, apparemment, ce n'est pas très grave. Mais quand on commence à analyser les situations dans chacune des régions, les choses sont très, très, très mal. La différence entre Bogotá et 𝐎𝐭𝐫, c'est une différence énorme. Et je crois qu'on doit aller plus loin de la moyenne pour examiner qu'est-ce qui se passe dans chacune des régions, parce que réellement les différences sont trop fortes. See?
Thank you very much, Director. Let me also ask Imam Cissé to talk a little bit about the second question. You had mentioned good governance, Imam, and essentially the question also goes to the role that data can play in building trust in government and the degree to which polarized societies and societies in which trust in public institutions has fallen can still get uptake on data.
En fait, je crois que les études que vous menez comparativement entre les pays, ici, je voudrais quand même, ce que je sais mieux, c'est le cas de la Côte d'Ivoire. La Côte d'Ivoire est dirigée par un ancien vice-président de la Banque mondiale, enfin du FMI, M. Alassane Ouattara. Du point de vue planification, un pays qui a connu une guerre en 2011, si vous arrivez en Côte d'Ivoire, vous allez lui demander où est-ce qu'il y a eu la guerre. Tout a été positivement transformé. Le nombre d'écoles construites en 10 ans a été multiplié peut-être par 20, 30. La scolarité, le taux de scolarité a augmenté de façon exponentielle. Ça, ce sont des statistiques qui sont disponibles, que vous pouvez constater. Vous savez également que la Côte d'Ivoire est un pays producteur de café, de cacao, n'est-ce pas? Le plus grand producteur de cacao dans le monde, vous le savez. Donc, les ressources existent. Et je dirais que, en général, l'Afrique n'est pas aussi pauvre que ça du point de vue ressources. Mais avec beaucoup de ressources, sans bonne gouvernance pour la plupart, pour certains pays, il est difficile au pays de s'en sortir et de mériter la confiance des bailleurs de fonds. La Côte d'Ivoire aujourd'hui est courtisée par les bailleurs de fonds. Ça, c'est connu. Vous pouvez voir les statistiques et les changements, les industriels qui viennent s'installer. Et tout ceci permet de résorber le chômage au fur et à mesure. Vous avez des jeunes de 25 ans, 30 ans qui sont devenus des ministres pour que les jeunes soient concernés par le développement qui est en cours. Et donc, de façon, on peut avoir une certaine autosatisfaction, mais c'est aussi fermer les yeux sur la condition des femmes. Il y a beaucoup à améliorer. Beaucoup a été fait, beaucoup s'est fait, mais il y a beaucoup à améliorer. Parce que si rien n'est fait en faveur de la femme, enfin, de façon globale et de façon plus incisive, je pense que le changement auquel on aspire ne peut pas avoir lieu. Et donc, c'est ce que je peux dire en ce qui concerne la Côte d'Ivoire. Nous avons sur 25 millions d'habitants, nous avons près de 6 millions de personnes venues des pays voisins et d'autres pays. C'est-à-dire que je ne dis pas que c'est un îlot de bonheur dans un océan de quelque chose, mais je pense que la Côte d'Ivoire est un modèle de développement, en tout cas, ce que nous vivons aujourd'hui. Il y a beaucoup à améliorer, beaucoup à faire. Et je crois que le président, qui est quand même un homme, un grand intellectuel, et beaucoup d'expérience, a amené le pays à un niveau assez important. Et je pense que le centre de développement a suffisamment échangé avec nos autorités, bien au niveau des universitaires qu'au niveau des dirigeants, du président, d'autres éléments. C'est ce que je peux dire.
Thank you.
Il y a la confiance qui existe entre notre pays et beaucoup de pays bailleurs de fonds et autres.
Merci. I have a question here, and I also have a question over here, and we will take those very short, if you please, and then get a very brief answer. Go ahead.
Hola al señor Jorge Iván González. Usted tocó un tema importante que es la legalización. En este caso hablo de la cocaína o de las drogas. Para nuestros países, América Latina, es un tema muy importante, tal vez no de urgencia internacional, pero sí hay que hablarlo y en este centro de investigación hay que traerlo sobre la mesa, porque cómo se legaliza este tipo de cosas que influyen directamente en la seguridad nacional, pero no solamente en eso, en el financiamiento y el blanqueamiento de capital, que se reutilizan para otras cosas. O sea, quiero saber su punto de vista sobre eso.
Gracias. Let's go ahead and get an answer to that because it was posed directly to the director, but if you please in French and not in, I mean, you can answer in Spanish too, but then I won't understand.
No, je crois que c'est une discussion que pour nous, c'est fondamental. Et c'est urgent. Notre président a dit les Nations Unies, c'est important de poser la question au niveau international. Nous avons fait un accord de paix avec le gouvernement Santos. Et maintenant, la guerre continue. Et la guerre va continuer. C'est impossible de faire la substitution de coca pour un autre culture. Il n'y a pas de possibilité de substitution. En pesos colombianos, 6 millions de pesos, ça donne une petite production, une petite ferme, 6 millions par mois. C'est impossible avec café, avec cacao, avec une autre culture, de produire 6 millions de pesos par mois. Mais c'est un sujet qui est encore tabou, je ne sais pas pourquoi, mais c'est impossible d'avoir un pays un peu avec ces problèmes. Et pour ça, je ne sais pas pourquoi, est-ce que la discussion internationale n'avance pas dans sa direction, mais pour moi, c'est tout à fait clair, pour tout le monde, c'est tout à fait clair. S'il y a de la coca, il y aura des groupes armés qui protègent la production de coca. Mais,
Merci. J'ai une question encore là, s'il vous plaît, and that will be the last one. And briefly, if you would, please.
Bonjour à tous, bonjour à toutes. Je viens là soutenir l'imam Cissé sur sa jeunesse, ce qui est déclaré. Je suis d'origine centrafricaine. Mon pays a connu la guerre et connaît encore la guerre par rapport aux déportés, la guerre qui s'est vue en Centrafrique, avec le déplacement des Peuls. Et je viens ici soutenir que les femmes chez nous souffrent beaucoup. Quand il y a la guerre, c'est la femme qui souffre, effectivement. Elles sont en première ligne par rapport à leur famille, par rapport à leurs enfants, par rapport à leur occupation quotidienne. Je soutiens aussi ce que vient de déclarer le ministre de Maurice, qu'une société dépend effectivement de l'éducation et de la santé. S'il n'y a pas cette structure-là, on ne peut jamais développer un pays. Et donc, tous ces facteurs-là amènent à ce que les pays africains qui traversent encore ces périodes difficiles ne peuvent jamais se projeter tant qu'il n'y a pas une base solide qui est structurée. Et donc, la femme reste encore en Afrique une personne arriérée qu'on la laisse derrière, qu'on ne veut pas la faire développer. Or, apporter une aide à faire anéantir ces pratiques des femmes, de les séquencier, c'est assez aliéner les femmes. Donc, je soutiens effectivement que ce que fait la Côte d'Ivoire, c'est une grande première en Afrique. Beaucoup de pays africains sont en train de suivre cette initiative pour pouvoir libérer la femme de cette corde qui tient au cou. Parce que sans la femme, sans la connaissance des femmes, on ne pourra jamais développer l'Afrique, quoi qu'il en veut. Et je soutiens beaucoup ça. Et je tiens mon chapeau à l'imam, si c'est que je vais tout à l'heure, pour pouvoir transmettre ce qu'il a commencé à faire en Côte d'Ivoire, dans mon pays et aussi dans le pays africain. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup à vous. And of course, reinforcing there that Côte d'Ivoire can be a model for other countries and the importance of working with models also of good governance. So with that, we will close this very, very interesting discussion. Let's please give our panelists a very warm round of applause. I think you have provided us with very valuable inputs to think about how we can do strong shared and green development working together. And of course, also identified the extremely complex challenges that we face. So many thanks for that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to go to a super short break, like as short as you can manage. So leave the room and then come right back in, please, because we do want to continue more or less in 10 minutes with our next panel from the group of eminent personalities. So see you shortly.
Probably, I would say, social disaster. These are, like we said, however, there are always sorts of years back. So that's why take some movement. What you have done in the past is still not happening. And that's why I said no. There are many countries there in China. It's beautiful. The idea where it's going to how the example I'm looking at now is see what has happened. I can just say that the president she comes to change something. Then you do. But if you don't have it, then it's stuff.
So my talks would probably be resilience and future, and this was one of those. I think that could
Pleasure to meet you and to discuss with you.
Thank you very, very much.
And beautiful job.
Thank you. Merci pour votre commentaire.
Et là, on va peut-être la vite parce que Mélinda, elle bouge pas. Donc, on va peut-être juste ouvrir une deuxième. On ouvre une deuxième. Voilà. Et là, c'est l'expérience. Mélinda, on ouvre une deuxième. Ça va être pas. Non. Alors, donc ça peut être je vais essayer
Oh, yeah. Excuse me. Let me take my No, sorry. Yeah, absolutely. Eh?
Non.
Excuse-moi.
Eau gazeuse, de l'eau gazeuse,
The what?
de l'eau gazeuse ou de l'eau plate?
Pétillant.
Pétillant, vous voulez de l'eau gazeuse?
C'est possible, pétillant. C'est possible.
Je vais chercher.
Oh, voici.
Hello, yeah, preparing my. Wonderful, wonderful. Very good, very good, very good. Extremely good. Yeah. Don Enrique, le estamos esperando, don Enrique.
¿Cómo estás, señor embajador? Qué gusto saludarlo.
Don Enrique, qué alegría, qué alegría. Bien, bien, bien. Ya sin muleta. Todavía algunas piernas un poco de.
Perfecto, está muy bien.
Pero bueno.
Cuando llegues a
Ya te va a mi madre se murió con 99.
Espero pasarla.
Y mi abuela con 103.
¿Qué te parece?
¿Sabes qué edad tiene mi abuelo?
No.
102.
¿Cuánto?
Mi abuelo 102.
Qué maravilla, qué bueno estar con usted.
A ver si eres veloz.
Bueno, yo también.
92.
Tengo un tío mío que tenía 207. Y me decía que habían saltado en la lista.
Ahí está los. Necesitan saber
¿Qué lengua se habla?
inglés.
Inglés, francés, español, árabe. No, bueno.
Dice que los folio para escucharlo.
Sí, ya eso, quizás.
¿Sí?
Bueno, bueno, solamente para escuchar si creo.
Muy pequeño. Right. Hello, nice to meet you. Very small that we're around, so we want to be. Yes, it's great to see you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your effort. You are doing good.
Yo no digo
Oh, yeah.
You're an excellent. I will be here in case you need that. Yeah.
sì. Gli mando un messaggino subito.
Well, of course.
Very nice. We're gonna nicely match the colors. Why don't you bring it
May I just remind everyone of how this is going to work? I will start out just by very quickly saying what we're about to do. Then we will see a video from the Secretary General, OECD Secretary General, very short. Then I will hand over to Ambassador 𝐓𝐿𝐻𝐿, who will say a few words about the report and so on. And I guess that you will, do you want to do that seated, Ambassador, or do you want to do it from the podium?
I just want to say good morning.
I think seated, yeah. Okay, we'll do everything seated, shall we? It's, yeah, it's nice.
And I'm looking forward to hearing.
No, I think he doesn't, so.
No.
And then I will introduce all three of you at one time, and then I would like to ask you to just hand off to each other. So I would start with Helen Clark, and then Helen Clark will hand over to 𝐎𝐭𝐨𝐝 And Enrique Iglesias will hand over to Stefano Manson.
Will you mention the members of the panel? No, no, I don't have the list. Oh, I got it.
You can say accepting present company they are.
Oh, sì, sì, sì. 4-5 adesso il cambio climatico. Adesso Mario, meno male che si parla italiano. Vai.
Salute also Mario as well. Of course.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please do come in and take your places. I think we may have more seats now, so those of you who are standing may not need to remain standing. Bell was still ringing out there, so I just will give it another minute. You come down a little bit toward the front because there's plenty of places in the middle rows, also over here to the side. So welcome back, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I hope everyone had a refreshing, albeit short, break. And we will now move to our final session, focusing on the future of the OECD Development Centre. And as we heard earlier on, at the center's high-level meeting a year ago, members of the center, who were mindful both of this upcoming 60th anniversary and of the development challenges that we face going forward, decided to establish a group of eminent personalities to reflect and report on these development challenges for the purpose of helping the center shape a statement on the future perspectives and on setting a direction for its work going forward. We are very honored to have several members of the group of eminent personalities with us here today. It is my great pleasure to welcome them, and I will introduce them shortly when they share some of the report's central when they share some of this, sounds like a copy of me. Some of the report's central findings and recommendations. But first, I would like to begin with a word of greeting from the Secretary General of the OECD. Matthias Cormann could not be with us in person this morning, but he has sent us this short video greeting.
Dear chairs, Helen, Enrique, dear Stefano, the members of the group of eminent personalities, distinguished guests, colleagues, friends all. Thank you for the invitation to speak with you about the work of the group of eminent personalities and the work of the 8th governing board meeting as we define how the Development Centre can best support members for the next 60 years. I was really pleased to be part of this meeting last year, which established this group to consider how the Development Centre could best respond to the emerging development challenges and support the OECD in its mission to remain globally relevant. The global economic landscape is changing with the emergence of new growth engines, new development models, and a greater diversity of public and private actors in the development arena. To be fit for purpose, the Development Centre must keep building on its core strengths, define its value proposition, and make it better known globally, while also consolidating its membership and partnerships. Indeed, since we established this group, the period of change and uncertainty and complexity has been further compounded by Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Poverty is growing, with 260 million people pushed into poverty by the pandemic, about half of them into extreme poverty. Fragility has increased in places that were already under severe pressure. Extreme weather events caused by climate change pose a serious threat globally, but present a particular risk for emerging and developing countries. Pre-existing inequalities have been exacerbated and persist with a disproportionate and often invisible impact on women and girls. With only 8 years left to achieve the objectives of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, we need bold action to get things back on track. Your report is a very timely contribution about how to strengthen multilateral efforts in this regard. Many countries have made unprecedented monetary and fiscal policy interventions to respond to the multiple crises faced in recent years. Developing countries, however, lack the same institutional capacity and financial mechanisms. Their government revenue is expected to remain almost 20% below pre-pandemic projections. Official development assistance then will need to increase by about $8 to $10 billion per year beyond the current level of $179 billion just to keep up with inflation. At the same time, aid budgets are also under pressure with the risk of a global recession and debt crisis looming. There is reason for optimism, though. Despite the challenges, we do have the tools and the will to confront them. Yesterday's high-level meeting discussed ways to address recent crises, including leveraging the role of the Development Centre. As part of our outreach efforts and as a place of intellectual independence and constructive criticism, as a convener to discuss solutions to shared challenges. To conclude, let me express my sincere appreciation for the work of co-chairs Helen and Enrique, as well as Stefano, our rapporteur, and to all the members of the group for contributing your time and your expertise. There is clearly more work to be done to make the Development Centre as impactful as possible and fit for purpose for its next 60 years. But we are able to build on a strong foundation of 60 years of high-quality contribution. I'm confident that together we can build a more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive future. I wish you positive and productive discussions today. Thank you.
And we're very grateful to the Secretary General for sending us that message. Before we hear directly from the members of the group of eminent personalities who are with us today, let's hear a little bit more about its genesis and aims from the chair of the OECD Development Centre Governing Board and permanent representative of Spain to the OECD, His Excellency Ambassador Manuel Escudero. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear Raga, Helen, Don Enrique, Stefano, Melinda, and dear representatives of our member countries and colleagues, thank you for your presence here in Paris today to celebrate 60 years of achievements of a unique institution. I would like to thank the staff of the Development Center, present and past, for the quality of their work and the commitment to this institution. I know some former staff members are in the audience, and I thank them for being here with us to celebrate the fruit of their work. The center, as you know, was created in 1962 to think deep and to think long. And this is what the group of eminent personalities also have done. They look at the profound changes in the world economy to identify how the Development Center can reconfirm its role and continue to deliver value to its members, the OECD and the international community at large. And in a nutshell, I would like to put to you what they have told us very briefly, talking, for instance, about the frustration with multilateralism that is growing in both developed and developing countries. They tell us that doubts about the effectiveness of the multilateral system have been magnified considerably by the inadequate global response to the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic, and by the high-income countries not contributing as pledge to climate finance for the adaptation and mitigation. Two important questions. At the same time, they tell us that developing countries are increasingly frustrated by their lack of voice in international institutions and its consequences. For example, as you know, out of the 650 billion in SDR for recovery, only around 30 billion corresponds to Africa. And developed countries seem to be unable to either use them for their own recovery or channel those into developing countries' recovery efforts. So this is the challenging and uncompromising picture they are putting in front of us. They are also, and I'm glad about that, stress that the center is more needed than ever to build mutual understanding and find solutions to our common problems. And here I would like to highlight two important questions that they have presented to us about the center. I think that they are relevant and worth really mentioning. And this is falling, you know, with all these papers. Sorry about this.
Can I help you?
But no, it's okay. But I think it's worth emphasizing this. They highlight two important features of the center. First, they acknowledge that the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development Center has managed, and this is important, to remain outside the political divides, which are adversely affecting the multilateral system. And that it is therefore, it has therefore a unique role to play in the current complex development landscape. I think this is really, you know, in my words, I would say, a jewel for the OECD. And secondly, the GEP also acknowledges the Development Center contribution, both within the OECD and internationally, to broadening and enriching the traditional narrative on development by introducing innovative concepts. In other words, they think that the Development Center is a very innovative center. And I think that this is very important. Raga, this is very important for us to keep on innovation, to keep innovating. Two examples at this moment I would like to mention. One is the new concept of a New Deal for Development that we are coining, that we are fleshing out in 2023 will really be fleshed out, you know, as I would say, and I hope, a very important contribution. Another innovative aspect or example that I would like to highlight now is the African Observatory for Investment that probably, you know, it will be up and running in 2023, and that would be, in our opinion, we hope, an important contribution for enhancing and increasing the investment flows into Africa. When we have, as we know, the challenge of a demographic explosion, and we have the obligation with the African countries together of providing opportunities for all. So this is the things that I wanted to really highlight here. I would like to conclude by saying that, in my opinion, the paper that we have in front of us is a masterpiece. I have to say, I have read it, I have studied it 3 times. The last time this morning at 5 o'clock in the morning, and that's why I'm slightly thick now. But I really think that it's a masterpiece. I think that we are going to be inspired by their position in terms of talking about a multilateral institution in a world that, you know, is at this moment in suffering from that point of view. And we are going to be also inspired by the way they envision the future of the center. I think really, honestly, that this paper is going to mark a historic moment for the center, and it will mean, in my opinion, the inauguration of a new era for the center. So thank you very much for the contribution.
Thank you.
And now, please, let's go to the important question.
I'll just introduce them first, if I may, because they haven't. We've heard their names mentioned now and then, but let's do the quick formal introduction of all 3, and then we'll go on. So 𝐎𝐿𝐿 is a former Prime Minister of New Zealand and also former UNDP administrator, as well as co-chair of the group of eminent personalities. Seated next to her, 𝐎𝐜𝐭𝐨𝐿 Iglesias is also co-chair of the group, and he served as president of the Inter-American Development Bank and as Secretary General of the Ibero-American Secretariat, 𝐓𝐿𝐿. And finally, Stefano Manservisi is rapporteur of the GEP, and he is also senior advisor at the European Institute of Peace and formerly served as Director General for International Cooperation and Development at the European Commission. So that's the formal part. And now over to you, 𝐿𝐿 to tell us about the results.
Thank you, Melinda. Thank you, Ambassador, for being so supportive of our work. And greetings to all this afternoon. Well, as has been said, this group was invited a year ago to review the development landscape in which the OECD Development Centre is operating and make some recommendations and observations about its future direction. We were a group that was drawn from across the world's regions, and apart from present company, on our group, there were also Brian Atwood, known to many here for his time at the DAC, Michelle Bachelet from Chile, Alicia Bacena, Muhammad Shatib Basri of Indonesia, Nancy Birdsall, Laura Chinchilla, Ibrahim Mayaki, and Javier Solana. And we yesterday heard, of course, the governing board of the Development Centre adopt its policy statement on future perspectives for the Development Centre, and we were pleased to see a lot of our report reflected in that new policy centre. As everyone knows, the centre was first proposed in 1961 by President John F. Kennedy as a place where countries from across income levels could discuss development. Well, if it was needed in 1961, it's even more badly needed today. We need inclusive spaces in our fractured world where there can be dialogue on development in a neutral space informed by sound evidence and analysis. This is the role of the centre. When we consider the polarization of our world today, when we consider the very challenging development landscape, our group strongly believes that the space created by the Development Centre is just so important, and that the OECD as a whole should be leveraging from this unique asset which it has. In our presentation today, I'll comment just briefly on this global development landscape. 𝐿𝐿 will speak to the perspectives of developing countries, and then Stefano will run through the recommendations which we made. But in brief, on the development landscape, we are engulfed really by this syndemic of crises, what we call at the Partnership for Maternal and Newborn and Child Health, which I chair, the 3 C's of COVID, climate, and conflicts. And it's not just Ukraine. There are many conflicts which are really ravaging the prospects of people in our world, and with so many spillover effects. So the compounding impacts of these many crises are taking their toll on human life, on our health and well-being, and of course on the health of our planet as well. And as always, it's the most vulnerable around our world who are impacted the most. We've seen projections of global growth dropping fast, of projections of rising inflation actually happening, lifting the risks of recession, of financial market volatility, and of debt crises. And we see the deepening inequality within countries and between countries. None of this makes for a happy world. For the first time since it was launched by UNDP in 1990, the Global Human Development Index value has declined for 2 years in a row. Quite shocking, really. 40% of countries saw declines in both 2020 and 2021, and 90% saw declines in one of those 2 years. This comes after decades of progress on human development. The crises we are living through have been a huge setback, and this is also reflected in the regression we see on progress towards the key Sustainable Development Goal targets. We've also, of course, been witness to significant change in the global economic geography. As the Secretary General said in his video just now, we see new growth engines created, new development models have emerged, and there is a much greater diversity of public and private development actors. South-South and triangular cooperation reflect those trends. So it follows that for really quite a while now, it has not been possible to frame development cooperation as something that is about flows of funding from higher income countries to lower income ones. Rather, development has to be understood in a framework in which developing countries are very much key to that interconnected world and very much part of providing solutions to the global challenges we face. We saw that change in framing coming through in the 2030 agenda 7 years ago and the Sustainable Development Goals, which made it clear that development is a concern for every country, and it needs a broader set of policies and partnerships and means of implementation. So the narrative around development, the modalities around development have shifted so much. And the role of the Development Centre here at the OECD in deepening an understanding about that in its neutral space and as a convener is just so important. We can say, as the ambassador has reflected, that the centre has stood aside from the geopolitical divides. It's been inclusive, and our world badly needs spaces like this in an endeavour to build trust and expand cooperation. And make no mistake, as Ambassador Escudero said, that trust has been eroded between us, severely damaged by the COVID-19 vaccine inequity, by the non-delivery by the high-income countries of the promised $100 billion a year for climate action for the low and middle-income countries. These are just the tip of the iceberg of distrust developing, and it is a great concern for developing countries. So for more on that perspective, I hand over straight to my colleague and co-chair, 𝐎𝐭𝐨 Iglesias. 𝐎𝐿𝐵, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon. Let me say a few words before making small comments about the report. In the last 60 years, I had had several occasions to work with the center, to benefit from working with the center, with the UN had, with Inter-American had, with Uruguay had. And I can tell you of my own experience, what has been the usefulness, the support that I had from dialogue and participation of their people in our own work. So for me to be part of this group has been a privilege. I wanted to say that before making the comments on what was for me to have 60 years of working with the center. Let me comment on some of the key issues in which developing countries had a very important contribution into this report. The international system is fracturing. A unipolar world that emerging in the 90s and by lack of commitment to economic liberalization and liberal democracy is no longer holding. Rather, blocs are forming, typically, but not only along regional lines, often using the goal of increasing resilience, and yet significant inequalities between regions and in this emerging global order, as a comparison between North and South America demonstrates. And the war in Ukraine shed light on the fracture and the polarization of the international system, as the subsequent voting in the UN General Assembly just demonstrated. This has already had important implications for the development arena too. Frustration with multilateralism is growing in developing countries and is growing in developed countries. Doubts about the effectiveness of the multilateral system had been magnified considerably by the inadequate global response to the COVID-19 pandemic. At the same time, developing countries are increasingly frustrated that their lack of voice in global institutions, or at least enough voice in global institutions, which have adapted to changes in the global centers of political and economic power of recent decades. Of particular concern is also that ownership in the special drawing rights appears to have diminished in certain developing countries. The divide between advanced and developing countries is opening up once again. And the divide within advanced countries is also widening. The economic convergence which had been occurring has been affected also by the COVID-19 pandemic. In the vast majority of cases, developing countries will recover more slowly from the pandemic and the implications of the war in the Ukraine than advanced economies with less fiscal space and a more difficult debt burden to manage. The setbacks to economic and social progress inflicted by the pandemic in developed countries are likely to be a source of frustration to their populations, risking an intensifying of the surges of protests seen prior to the crisis. The Ukrainian war has added inflation, food and energy insecurity to the list of vulnerabilities that impact on poorer countries the most. Global policy priorities are perceived differently in the global north and in the global south. And global policy support needs to be mindful of developing country realities. This is particularly visible in environmental issues. Although developing countries are already suffering the worst effects of climate change and biodiversity loss, there is no talk of green recovery packages or green new deals in developing countries, because the financing of which such approaches rely is not there. Many people are concentrated on the what, far fewer focus on the how. The developing landscape is populated by a large number of organizations working on the many complex challenges in developing countries. Their prescriptions are proposals typically focused on what developing countries should do to respond. However, there is a need to focus more on the how. How greater emphasis is needed on promotion, dialogue as a means of building trust and gaining acceptance for reforms, both politically and at the level of the individuals. Listening, learning, and compromising are underexploited mechanisms for foster cooperation and consensus, not only nationally, but particularly internationally. Amid this fractured and uncertain landscape, it is important for policymakers and developing practitioners in particular to build on areas where consensus exists, including special drawing rights. At the same time, the capacity to innovate will be essential to advance a more inclusive and effective multilateral system which can support national development strategies and reforms. It will be crucial to enhance the participation of countries across income levels and space in policy dialogues, aiming to build and expand mutual understanding and common ground and experiences which new forms of cooperation are so badly needed. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I will try and outline, let's say, the line of reforms, essentially, around which the center could develop its work on the basis of this analysis, which has been well framed by Helen and by Enrique. And I would like to underline the 2 points that Ambassador 𝐎𝐭𝐨 said at the beginning, because these are two key features of today's center. And it is the ideal starting point for, a new future. First, its credibility, because it remains outside the big battle, very often ideological. All the fractures, all the divides, which have been, let's say, recalled here, in particular in the light of the several crises, the crisis of peace, the crisis of pandemic, the crisis of economic impact, etc., which have fractured the world and also affected multilateralism and its credibility. Now, the OECD Center remains neutral in all this, remains credible. I think this is a point which must be underlined, because it seems to be obvious, but in reality is not. It's one of the few places in the world where this kind of credibility is remaining and is appreciated by everybody. And the point number one, which is basically linked to this neutrality, it's its capacity of innovating in terms of capturing the new challenges of development. And actually, and I can say that because in my former position, I've been working very often with the center, which was always a step ahead in identifying the new challenges of development, which is not just distributing money, which is not just talking about oldish cooperation, is a way really to identify the new, not only definitions, but realities, which are inspiring the challenges that we usually call development. And I think that on this, it has always, let's say, promoted innovative concepts, and they were innovative precisely because they were based on dialogue, they were based on working on equal footing with the people, not teaching lesson, but working on equal footing, and always evidence-based. I think that these are the two key features of the center of today, on which the future should be built. And it is starting from this that we identified 5 characteristics, which are the 5 pillars, I have to say, around which the center can further develop, can further strengthen, and can further, let's say, contribute to the solution of problems in this very difficult moment, in this fragmented world, in which peace is at risk all the time. Not only it is at risk, but is already, let's say, more than attacked. Let's say. So therefore, five let's say, pillars. One is to strengthen its intellectual independence. It is the OECD Center has been and still is, let's say, an innovator, a driving force, driving, let's say, the innovative thinking, and for that reason is a trusted advisor. I think that this is the first pillar, and obviously our recommendation is that this intellectual independence must be safeguarded, must be even strengthened, and in order to build on this sort of capacity of elaborating, the dialogue, the equal footing in which the center is working with its partner must be even further strengthened. And third, let's say, element of this first pillar is to be able to go closer to the ground in supporting the implementations of its political recommendations. So in order to close the circle, the how to innovate, with whom to innovate, and where to innovate. I think this is the first pillar, which is really based on this, let's say, innovative and driving forces of being, let's say, an intellectual driving force, the trusted advisor. The second one is its reality and its capacity of being a credible convener, credible convener. And, this should be also safeguarded, not only, but also should be broadened in order to bring together around this reality, around this table, which is the center, the most diverse group of countries and bodies, and maybe building on this in order to, let's say, diversify and identify the specificity of the group, like the small islands, for example, and their specific, let's say, not only needs, but realities and opportunity, in order to, let's say, to talk with the regional bodies which are producing innovations over there, so to go, let's say, a bit beyond what are the states, strictly speaking, the new regional grouping which are set up, also experiencing new form of cooperation, and then to convene in order to share, not to teach, to share, to listen, to be able to acquire knowledge and to transform them into, let's say, new action. This is particularly true, as Helen said at the beginning, in the moment when SDGs, in fact, told the story of some unsustainability in the world, but now, paradoxically, risk to be forgotten because the fragmentation drives a bit away. And this is particularly true in many countries, so in many continents. In Africa, for example, emergencies are driving now the thing. But I believe that, in our experience, SDGs should remain a bit the polar stars in order to be credible, you have to innovate in thinking and identifying new platform. And in order to do this, we suggest also to have a more direct interrelation with the Minister of Finance, in order to have a new set of interlocutors, because at the end of the day, Minister of Finance are those which are deciding in the countries how much should be invested in development in innovative way. And finally, to convene non-state actors. And I would like to insist not only on civil society, which obviously is extremely important, but on private sector and foundations, because these are, the new actor, emerging actor, already emerged, by the way, which are able to change the impact, not only in quantitative terms, but also in qualitative terms, how to think. Third pillar is the role which is played as honest broker, again, based on its neutrality, which has been recalled previously, and on the dialogue, which has been always conducted on an equal footing. And therefore, from this point of view, it is particularly important to have the honest broker because, let's be frank, we have to invent new forms of multilateralism. I would like to say that, the importance of getting together around the table, the most diverse group of people, of countries, of experiences, is precisely to sometimes create some form of targeted multilateralism, some form of new way, which are necessary in order to find a common ground, find common decision, find common interest. And then, to draw out of it policy recommendations, because at the end, we need guidelines. We need not only thinking, but we need some indication on how to translate all this into practice. Now, the fourth pillar on which we insisted is that to recognize as a sort of bridge builder, you know, to bring about, you know, differences, different interests, different point of view, different ideologies also of reference, you know, and therefore, you know, I think to operationalize further this, you know, our suggestion, our advice is to consolidate and expand the membership of the center across the regions. First and foremost, obviously, to let's say bring into the center all the OECD members, of course, because there is this sort of strange asymmetry. Let's call that in this way. You know, let's be frank. You know, this is one of the center of credibility of the OECD as such, but paradoxically, not all the OECD members are members of the center. So therefore, first task is to bring back in certain cases, or to bring in, you know, all across the membership of the OECD, but also to bring it non-OECD state. I mean, there is the Global South, which partially is already around this table, but I think it deserves a special attention, a special intervention. The new Global South emerged, and the new point of view, this is particularly important. And this role of bridge builder, I think it's particularly important, is almost the unique place because it is trusted, because it is neutral, because it is innovative, where this can be envisaged in a credible and operational way. And the fifth pillar is, let's say, between the OECD as such and the center. The center is an asset for the OECD. And I think that maybe a new architecture of relationship between the experience, the huge experience which exists in the OECD, and the specific experience which has been developed by the center should find new ways of cooperation, new way of thinking. Also, let's say, allow me to be frank, to, let's say, counter this perception which exists in particular in the South, and that the OECD is the club of rich. You know, this is a perception which is there. Sometimes it's not only a perception, allow me to say, you know, and there is the necessity of innovating, and the new way of interacting between the center and the OECD could be an asset for everybody, and for the OECD, which remains one of the most important places in the world, where you elaborate analysis, you collect data, you produce evidence, and you facilitate negotiation. So therefore, this is a bit the 5 points that they say the 5 pillars around which, building on what the OECD has done so far, we believe it can become even more important, even stronger, and let's say a driving tool for the whole system. This is what we have said, and I've been pleased, by the way, in seeing that, you know, several of these points have been captured in the document which has just been adopted by the 𝐓𝐿M. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all three of you for sharing those messages, those conclusions and recommendations, and clearly indicating why there was a lot to keep Ambassador 𝐎𝐿⁴ awake when he got up at 5 to read it once more. So greatly appreciated. And I had dangled the hope earlier that we would take audience questions. I'm afraid I have to dash that hope now because we are running late. So okay, I'm seeing that we could take just a couple. So I'm going to take questions from those who haven't asked questions already, though I thank you very much for your interest. Let's go to the lady in front, please. Could we get a mic to her? And do remind us who you are, please.
Yeah, Rama Rajdi, United States Press Agency, based in Paris. Thank you for this very inspiring session. Just wanted to raise the question as regard of disability, because I see that you've been bringing up on the table the innovative new approach, and even presenting maybe Mr. Stefano, even offering maybe tackling a new way of getting closer to the beneficiary and to the populations with a new way of maybe a new model, in terms of multilateralism. And also Mrs. Helen Clark, she also raised the question of SDGs. There are 17 SDGs, and in 2015, the 𝐎𝐭𝐨𝐝 proposed to really include the 15%, because we are 15% in the world. Means 1 billion people. And I'm just amazed, and I'd like to see what are the outcomes of your group when it comes to disability, and also maybe the assistive technology that can also be helpful and serve the disabled people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take one or two other questions and then we'll come back for brief responses. So I had a question here in the middle. Go ahead, please put your hand up higher. Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda. Very briefly, I'm Takuro from Japanese, from Tokyo. I can't agree more with what the group of eminent personalities said today. But before that, I'd like to once again commend the wise decision to set up the group of eminent personalities last year. That we got very useful, wonderful recommendations. That will be the basis for our the work. So we have to keep on moving. We have to keep on working on it. Then make it specifics, make it real for the next year, next 10 years, and next 60 years, as SG said. In that sense, let me just emphasize that there all the recommendations are very useful, but to me, the recommendation number 5, just Helen Clark said, the development center is an integral part of the OECD architecture. As such, it's the as part of its global outreach effort, the OECD should leverage the center's non-OECD membership. This is very important point. So in order to do it more widely, more effectively, I think whole OECD should work on it. So SD should take the leadership, good leadership, especially to invite non-center members of the OECD to come back again for the all the reasons, including the financial reasons. Yes, so I'm very much looking forward. We have to realize that we have so many supporters in and out the center, like we see today. So we are, in the good mood. So shall we work on it very positively? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, to quote scripture, that's a message: don't hide your light under a bushel, but let it shine forth. One more question.
Oui, bonjour, merci beaucoup pour ce panel extrêmement intéressant. J'ai aussi une question par rapport à la 5e recommandation qui m'interpelle beaucoup. On a parlé du risque de fragmentation du multilatéralisme, et là, j'aimerais comprendre comment cette 5e recommandation s'articule finalement avec le rôle de l'ONU. J'ai l'impression qu'on est en train finalement de créer une 2e instance internationale multilatérale proche de ce que devrait être l'ONU et l'Assemblée générale. Et j'aimerais savoir comment vous vous situez par rapport à cela. Merci.
Merci à vous. So let us start and get a few responses. Helen Clark, do you want to get us started? Disability and also additionality vis-a-vis the UN?
Let me respond to the first 2 questions. And firstly, on disability, let me say it needs to come hugely up the priorities of international sustainable development. It may be of interest that just very, very recently, I think what's a relatively new organization, Assistive Technology Scale, a global partnership for assistive technologies, has issued very good new reports talking about the need to make this shift with the visibility and action on support for assistive technologies, and also noting that the the growing global burden of NCDs is adding, to the numbers of people who need the support of assistive technology. So I'd really recommend that new report. And just in response to the intervention from the Japanese participant, I think it would send a much stronger message about the importance of the Development Centre to the whole OECD if the whole OECD membership actually signed up to it. And, otherwise what message is being sent? It was the country of JFK which had the concept for the centre. This needs to be carried through, particularly in times like this, when this is a rather unique space that has been created for getting everyone around the table on an equal basis. Enrique.
I think that given the experience I had personally in working on development, the issue is to have the capacity to talk to people who are doing the same things in other places, both of the region or outside of in other parts of the world. You see, you can benefit from doers trying to check experiences and to be able to work on that in order to make your own decisions. It has been always very useful to me. This sort of dialogue, perhaps, is the best asset of this institution. Dialogue among countries doing the same thing in different places, sharing the same problems and concerns, how to deal with the public opinion, how to move into the international arena. So this dialogue, which is really the fresh contribution that this institution is doing and can do to countries in the world, particularly developing countries.
Thank you very much. Stefano Manservisi.
Well, I think that since I'm the one a bit less political, allow me to say that vis-a-vis disability, there's been a lot of papers, much less action. And therefore, I think that also here, the contribution that the center working with the civil society, working with the different interlocutors which have gathered different experiences, so could be particularly useful in order to close the gap between papers and declarations and actual realities. I know as a former practitioner, in formulating project and program, every time there was a small footnote or a paragraph or something concerning the specificity and disabilities, etc., always. Because this is necessary, because this is important. But the translation of this into real practices, which is really useful, well, it was much more difficult. And I think that on this, the center can add value in terms of thinking innovative solutions and to accompanying maybe. When I said, to go back closer to the ground, this is a typical example on which I think we can innovate, the center can innovate and can also accompany and to test the policy recommendation. On the issue of the UN, I think, frankly, I don't see that there is any confusion. First we are talking about, an institution which is part of the OECD, and therefore the fifth, let's say, recommendation is precisely how the OECD, being OECD, can use the Development Center in order to enrich the debate. By the way, I would say, considering the quite difficult and problematic state of multilateralism in the world in this moment, I think to have a place more in order to innovate and to sit around the table without preconditions would be particularly useful, but I don't see any risk of duplicating or something. It remains within the OECD in order to bring forward the, let's say, the key features and capacities of the OECD. And then, the outreach, as we said, the outreach is as wide as possible because I think it's the mutual interest to do it. And then let's see what it will be created. I refer to a sort of targeted or experimental multilateralism because, frankly speaking, we have to be pragmatic, and therefore we can find, and the center has already indicated several paths sometimes in how we can isolate an issue and then around this to find a solution and to find then the possibility to implement it collectively. So I think that these are suggestions which could be particularly useful in my view. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much to all of you for this very enlightening exchange. And I would also like to thank the audience for your attention and your contributions. And with warm congratulations to the center and warm thanks to all of the team who has also worked very hard behind the scenes to make these discussions possible. I will now hand back to the center's director, 𝐎𝐜𝐿, for concluding words.
Dear everyone, I'm almost my voice is cracking because this has been such a inspirational and wonderful moment. So my final words should only be two. Thank you. But there's no such thing as, a perfect world. We've been talking about that. Just in conclusion, I don't want to repeat or rephrase anything that has been said here today, in both panels and by these extremely wonderful visionaries. And what I want to say is thank you for the support, for the guidance, for the vision, and for giving us a tool. To hear Helen Clark say, I think the OECD should utilize and amplify the development center to its own benefit is something, and I'm not directly quoting, is something that I am going to repeat and say loud and clear here within the organization and outside. Because it's important. I mean, of course, I fully agree, and I've said it, but it's really cool to be able to quote Helen Clark saying that. And to hear Enrique saying, speaking of cool, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to be very casual in my wordings here, but to hear someone say, I have had on many occasions the opportunity to work with the Development Center over the 60 years. Enrique, you are a treasure. No, and still look like he's 61. With the UN hat, with the IDB hat, with the Uruguay hat. And I can tell you a little secret. He came to visit me after I had taken up my position. It was like, a month into it or something. And he wanted me to give him one promise because he put on his Latin America hat. And he's like, you just have to remember, do it for me. Never forget Latin America. And I promised him that I never will. But he has many hats. And another thing that you said, Enrique, you can benefit from doers. And this is so true. We are policymakers, we are advisors, but we have to make sure that we speak to the doers so they can implement what we are talking about. Stefano, the guidance and the recommendations, innovation, it's my favorite word, I think, ever. And to use it and to figure out, to continue to be always a step ahead, as you talked about the center in its past. That is very important, to anticipate change, because development, as the former president of Costa Rica said when he came to the OECD and he addressed council and the governing board, he said, development, another word for development is good change. So we have to be innovative in producing good change. And that is how the incredible staff of the Development Center and all of its friends, I think that's why my voice is probably going to be cracking, because over the last 2 days, I realize, and I say this to my colleagues within the Development Center, you guys, we have a lot of friends. We have a big, huge group of friends that we have to make sure that we keep close and work with from now on, as we have been doing. And I think, now I'm getting to the thank you parts. I think I want to mention first the incredible staff of the Development Center. I'm looking at Stelina, who has been, yes, we have to give Stelina a good round of applause, because she's the missing link between the group of eminent personalities and the Development Center, because we were very, very determined in not making this a secretarial report. It was hands off, it was arm's length, but we provided support through Stelina, wonderful Stelina, who worked, of course, diligently at this as with everything else that she does. And that's how their voices came through in this report, which is so important. But the Secretariat, just because I have the floor and you're not going anywhere until I've said this, you cannot imagine the treasure that we have in the center and the privilege that I've had for the last year to be surrounded by people who are superior to me in every way. And together we form sort of a constellation. And to have the privilege of being around stellar people every day, that just makes your life better. It makes me look good too, because they shine. And of course, to have a chair such as our wonderful Manuel Escudero, who is a power plant in his own way. He is full of ideas. He's a factory of ideas, and sometimes we get along really well. But sometimes, like he described it yesterday to his minister from Spain, he said, "Yes, this is Raga. We get along like a house on fire." So we don't necessarily. It's like the Development Center. We don't necessarily always have to agree about everything, but we respect each other's views, and we try to make sure that all of our views get into the equation to make a better world. Finally, Melinda Crane. This is the second year that Melinda Crane has done us the honor of moderating this session. The HLM yesterday and now this session. Last year it was virtual, it was fabulous, but it was nothing compared to this. So thank you for your wonderful job. And to you, dear audience, and also the ones who are watching us on Zoom, you are our new group of friends. And we are very, 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 very involved with all of our friends. So be sure that we will practice what we preach in being inclusive. Come to us, use the center, help us to make it the best center that we possibly can make it, have it be, because that is good for all of us. And we have the right in this respect just to be selfish. We want good things to happen. We want good change. And the Development Center is ready to help you in doing that. So again, thanks to the staff. I see Federico here, Ayumi, everyone. And I'm stopping now because I will leave someone out. But thank you, thank you, thank you. And let's go and contribute and cooperate in making the world a better place. Thank you.
bilateral now by joining you for launching 20 minutes on top. No, no.
No, last year, I don't do it. Yes.